Hello and welcome back. We are starting our third unit of health communication, and I confess I sort of designed the syllabus so that all of the things that I like to talk about the most are sort of at the end, so I would definitely have something to look forward to. And besides that, I think everything that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the semester really fits together. I'm going to call this the Media and Technology unit. We've already sort of dabbled in that with health campaigns, and even some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today might ring a bell about things we've talked about in the past regarding social support and stuff like that. But this is my kit and caboodle. Like, this is the stuff that I get most excited about. And today we're going to be covering chapter 7, so sort of rewinding in the textbook and talking specifically about the role of technology in health communication, which, oh my gosh, is a huge deal. I don't know if you can see this on my notes here. I wrote like, oh, let me see. I'm so bad at this. So much good stuff. Like, it was very difficult to decide what I'm going to talk about today. So I would cover everything, but I tried as best as possible to sort of condense the most juicy things in the chapter. We'll start off like the textbook does, talking about in the most general way that our easy access to information these days, namely thanks to the internet, has changed health communication. And some of you guys had even referenced some of the things the book had talked about in discussion posts that you've had throughout the semester, mentioning things about how technology gives us more access to information, so we can sort of satisfy some of our hypochondriac tendencies to read into different medical symptoms that we might have, type in WebMD to find out, oh, what could this mean, right? And actually, I saw a funny cartoon the other day that had a flow chart that said you go into WebMD and it'll ask you if you have a symptom, and it either goes straight to cancer or to you're already dead. You know, I mean, it's this idea that we can always find information about whatever we're hoping to find information out about. And as that example illustrates, right, that access to information isn't necessarily a good thing. It really depends on our own literacy, right, how good we are at making sense of the information that we find, but also the credibility of the websites that we're using. WebMD, I think, actually happens to be pretty good. But there are some uncredible sources out there. There's also sources with special interests. For instance, going to look up the merits of using a particular medication, if the web page is sponsored by a pharmacy, right, they might have some sort of special interest that makes their information less credible if they're trying to persuade you to just buy their product. This access to information does do a lot of different things, though, besides just making it easier for us to look up what that rash on our arm is, right? Or to try to figure out what it's going to be like when we go to the doctor's office if we haven't been to a particular specialist, or even look up different doctors or look at their Yelp ratings. I don't actually know if doctors have Yelp ratings, but certainly we can do things like that, right? The empowered consumer can go and we can share stories that we've had to make informed decisions about our doctors. But what also comes from all this access to information are changes in things like the patient-provider relationship. So now, right, we used to only have doctors that gave us information about our health, and we would be completely dependent on them. But now it's not uncommon for people to go to the doctor and actually make specific requests for drugs, maybe that they saw advertised in TV or advertised on TV, because we have this direct-to-consumer advertising. But we also, of course, have the ability to go and find things out for ourselves, whether the information's accurate or not. And so we sort of come into the doctor-patient relationship with a little bit more power, even if it's, again, not necessarily used wisely. And I don't mean to suggest that it always is, because I think there's a lot of good things that come out of this. But I just want us to be aware that this isn't just changing how we do things. It's also changing the power dynamics in our relationships with our providers. Another cool thing that sort of comes out of our access to technology is the ability, though, to keep better track of ourselves, to monitor ourselves. I've mentioned a couple times since we've been doing this that, I have one of these Fitbits, which, of course, I'm proud to say I made my daily step goal today. See how it all lights up, right? So this is another way that technology allows me to monitor my health. The Fitbit keeps track of how many steps I take a day, loosely how many calories I burn, but it's not so good. And it helps me set goals and monitor my progress and really motivates me to take care of my health. There are other tools like this, though, for people with diabetes. There are apps that help people monitor their blood glucose level and websites and things like that. So it's not just about information, right? But there are increasingly more tools that give us the type of health information about ourselves that allow us to better take care of ourselves and make health decisions based on that. Again, lessens our dependency on providers to some extent too. But I do think it is important to sort of highlight that even if people have access to all this information, that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to use it or they can understand it, right? There's still a baseline level of health literacy, of basic literacy that's required, and technology experience. Just because people have access to the internet doesn't necessarily mean, for instance, that they would be savvy enough to know how to search for the types of information that's going to best benefit them. But taking a step back from that, it's also important to acknowledge that not everybody has access to this information superhighway. There's something called the digital divide that refers to sort of the have and have-nots in the world as far as technology goes. The digital divide is discussed as sort of a disparity that exists between people that have access to particularly the internet, but it's not just about the internet, it's also about the speed of the internet. If they have broadband access or if they don't, and people who don't have that access. And we find that people that have the access have all sorts of benefits, some of which have led to the divide to begin with, but then that sort of perpetuates when you already start off in a good place, and so then you have access to more information and you continually improve yourself, while the people who already maybe were in a bad place, who don't have access to things like the internet, can't benefit from it, and therefore this is an increasing gap, a digital divide between the haves and have-nots. The truth is the research suggests that as years go on, that divide is actually decreasing, which is a good thing. More and more people around the world are getting access. But as I keep alluding to, there are new concerns now about how even if people have access, that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to use it, right? There's technology literacy at stake, or if we're talking about health, there's health literacy. So there's also challenges in trying to make sure that even those people who have access and they have the right speeds, they've been given broadband. This is actually a big deal in West Virginia because it's hard to get broadband service to everywhere in this mountainous region, and providers don't want to give it if it's only going to help a few people. So we have sort of some of these divide issues here. But we find that even when we give people access to the internet, encouraging them to use it when they're not used to using it, when they've never had to rely on it before, and then teaching them the skills and giving them the tools they need to use it is another challenge. I only bring this up because these are things that are very hot topics right now in health communication circles, right? So how do we now figure out how to help people use the internet for in ways that will help and not hurt their overall well-being and health? And I should just point out too, sort of, hitting on some themes that we've had all semester long, there are certain people who are more susceptible to these digital divide problems, who are less able, in general, I mean, stereotyping a little bit, but it's important to be aware that are less able to take advantage of these technology resources. People with low socioeconomic status, people in rural communities, just like I mentioned, it's kind of a problem here in West Virginia. People with low literacy in general aren't going to have very high levels of tech literacy. People with disabilities, just all underserved populations, this tends to be a bigger deal with, which in its own way could explain why these populations tend to have greater health disparities. The lack of access to technology is just one more strike against these groups of people. Anyway, but moving on to a happier topic, let's talk about some of the things that I love about technology, particularly as it relates to health communication. I want to kind of merge the discussion in your textbook on the advantages of technology for social support and for doctor-patient interaction, although this is going to be talking more about social support. I think talking about the advantages of the internet for both of these things really hits on how different affordances that the internet has that we can't get in face-to-face makes this a unique place, if we can look at the internet as a place, to seek out social support or even medical support in some cases. So this is my own list here to sort of help you condense all this. I listed, let's see, four main advantages that the internet can offer that might encourage people to seek out social support there. And we're thinking about, let's say, social support for different ailments that they have, or we had talked before about support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous or even pro-ana groups, but this could also be social support that people seek out while they're on chemotherapy or because they're cancer survivors, right? The idea that the internet allows us to connect with other people and form groups just for the purpose of providing social support and exchanging information and resources. So one of the advantages is access to similar others. This is the same advantage that online dating has, right? It used to be that we were just confined to our community, and sometimes that makes it more difficult to find other people like us or who are going through the same things as us, especially if our community's smaller, or we I don't know, have jobs and we can't access all the resources in our community. The internet allows us to meet people just like us, and it allows us to do that fairly easily by searching for different terms or finding groups, right, that have the same criteria that we're looking for. I always bring up my students in a lot of my classes that are more traditional undergraduate students, so they maybe went straight from high school into college, and they tend to find things like online support groups and even online dating websites kind of creepy because, oh my gosh, you meet strangers there, and who wants to meet strangers? And I always tell them, I'm like, well, it's very easy for you to say because right now when you're in college, you have access to a whole world of common interests. You know, there are clubs organized around your interest, and you have a really easy time finding other people like you because the world's sort of chopped out like that. But once you go out in the world and you get jobs and you don't have as much time and you don't have all of these sort of social interest groups carved out for you, the internet provides a really valuable service because it allows you to reach out and seek out people from all around the world. Your pool is much bigger who are like you. And when you are dealing with a particular type of illness, especially if it's rare, this becomes a really valuable tool. The other nice thing about the internet is it is 24/7. It's not limited to a weekly meeting or anything like that. If you need support, you can always turn on the internet and find it there. Another thing, a little vocabulary word here, is that a lot of these like social support websites offer anonymity. And we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about social support earlier. But this basically means that I can go online and I don't have to use my real identity. If you're dealing with some sort of illness that's stigmatized, or even if it's not stigmatized and you're just embarrassed about it, it might be easier for you to share your experiences and admit to other people that you're going through these things if you do have that option of being anonymous. So that's another really important part. And finally, another A word, a lot of communication on the internet, unless you're using like a video chat or something, is asynchronous, which means that it doesn't happen in real time. You have a little time to respond back. You don't have to, like face-to-face communication, respond back and forth, back and forth, back and forth immediately. If I send you an instant message, I can think about what I'm going to say before I type it to you. If I'm in a chat room and you say something to me, I can really think about how I want to respond before I, instead of responding instantly back like I would need to in face-to-face communication. And the advantage of that is people can think about how they want to represent themselves. It gives people a little bit more control over the interaction. So again, if you're talking about difficult subjects, if you're trying to word something or figure something out, it provides a really good environment for that because of the asynchronicity. These different, again, not all environments are asynchronous. Skype would not be asynchronous, but instant message, text messaging, things like that are definitely asynchronous. The other nice thing, going back to sort of this access to similar others, is that because there's actually reduced nonverbal cues in a lot of these environments, we're also not limited by our biases and prejudices. We might not connect with some people in real life because they don't look like us, but on the internet, what really matters is what's common to us, and for social support, that's a really important thing. As your book puts it, there's an unbounded network there that you have access to that's not really confined by any types of groups besides what you're looking for. So that's a very nice thing. I don't mean to say, I get all like mushy about this stuff, because I really do. I'm kind of in awe at the age that we live in now, and I don't mean to make it sound like everything's all rosy, but as far as this type of thing goes, as far as social support, I really do think that the internet has really changed the game, right, and given people a very valuable gift. Trying to think about kind of where I want to go here. I know, because I'm already like at my 15-minute mark. Well, let me just say this. I want you to go ahead and read about the advantages of electronic medical records, which I'll just sort of outline right now. One thing is that they provide more storage, and they decrease errors. I'm just going to go through this fast. They decrease errors for a lot of reasons. One is because they keep records so that you can't mix up drugs or things like that if you're a provider, and they allow providers to communicate in a way that doesn't make it so that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So the pharmacist has access to the records and things like that, so they don't you don't end up getting prescribed things that you're not supposed to that would mix badly. So that could be a potential advantage, but also you don't even have to deal with doctors' handwriting anymore, which is kind of cool. So concentrate on, when you're reading the book, the advantages of electronic medical records and how that's really revolutionizing things. But there is, of course, a downside that I want you to pay attention to when you get there, which your book talks a little bit about how this could potentially create a barrier between face-to-face communication with the patient. So if doctors are too into their computers, or nurses even, right, does that take away from some of the human interaction, which I think is an important question. Your book also talks about some of the advantages technology has for just accessing providers, and I think that's also really important, just whether it's reaching your doctor after hours and leaving a note and exchanging emails, or even telemedicine, which is becoming increasingly popular, I know, at the WVU hospital, for when there are patients who live 4 hours away from Morgantown and can't get here. We can now use telemedicine so that their doctors can all consult and have meetings with them without them having to drive to Morgantown to go to the hospital. So that's another very cool thing. Again, I'm sorry, I want to talk about everything, but summary lecture. It's a summary lecture, Elizabeth. But I do want to conclude with this, jumping back. So make sure you read all that. Sorry. But I do want to explain 2 things that I think are really important for understanding how we think about computer-mediated communication, sort of a preview for some of the other classes I teach. In thinking about how people interact online, we often consider it not as good as face-to-face, right? People use terms like, well, I talked to her there, but I haven't talked to her in real life, implying that what happens on the internet isn't really real life. And I think that's really a mistake. There's a theory that your book mentions about called social information processing theory, which essentially at the end of the day says that it is true that face-to-face communication can be a better way to develop relationships. People can get to know each other better, a little bit more quickly, because we have access to all these nonverbal communication cues. So the fact that right now you can hear my voice, and you can see my expressions, and you can see all my crazy hand gestures, and I don't know if you can hear my bracelets, all that stuff, it suggests that it's a richer way to communicate with me than if we were just texting. What social information processing theory found, or what the research on this theory found, is that that is true, but interestingly enough, the studies that they did suggested that if you just give people a little bit more time to communicate online through text-based communication, the relationship can be just as good. It just develops a little bit more slowly. So the reason I think this is important for health communication is if we think about using the internet and other types of technology to communicate health information, whether it's with people giving us social support or even doctors and providers, it's not that it's not that using technology is any less quality. It just requires a little bit more time, and so that's an important acknowledgement. This would not be a very good place to discuss maybe emergency issues or things that are very time sensitive. But given all those other advantages that I discussed earlier and combining that with social information processing theory, it suggests that technology can be a very useful tool for communicating. In fact, the hyperpersonal communication model, which is also discussed right after that, actually talks about some of the circumstances in which computer-mediated communication, when people communicate through these technologies, it can actually result in hyper-personal communication, which is more intimate, which is more intense relationally than regular communication. And that's just precisely because we don't have all the cues we have in face-to-face communication. People can read in to what they don't have. So if you think, for instance, that I sound like a very funny, witty person in my text message, the idea is that because you can't see me, but you like me, chances are you're going to infer that I'm actually an attractive person and somebody you would want to be around. So in that way, sometimes we can actually develop relationships with greater intensity in online environments than we can offline environments. Incidentally, that's why people get in situations like being catfished and everything like that, because how could somebody fall in love with somebody they haven't met before? Well, they have hyper-personal communication. They actually get into a hyper-intimate situation because the internet has a lot of these reduced nonverbal cues environments. This is so long. Oh my God. Please don't hate me. I'll finish now. Okay. Really. Goodbye. Be shorter next time.